A janitor was laughed at in a dance studio unaware. She was once Broadway's lead choreographer. Chapter 1. The Janitor. New York, on an October evening, carried a chill that seeped through the narrow streets of the Lower East Side. Spark Dance Studio, nestled on the third floor of an aging building, glowed like a rough gem amid peeling walls and foggy windows. Thumping hip-hop blared from a Bluetooth speaker, blending with the squeaks of rubber soles on wooden floors and the laughter of teens. In a corner of the room, Clara James gripped the handle of her mop, her calloused hands moving slowly, almost meditatively, across the sweat-streaked floor. At 60, Clara still had a slender frame, though deep wrinkles creased the corners of her eyes and strands of silver now threaded her once golden hair, tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her deep blue eyes carried a quiet sorrow, as if they had seen a lifetime. A faded gray janitor's jacket wrapped around her body like armor, concealing a past once ablaze with brilliance. She spoke little, working quietly, her gaze occasionally drifting to the young dancers practicing nearby. They were children of immigrant families brimming with passion, yet shadowed by invisible scars. At the center of the room was Jenna Martinez, a 17-year-old with a high ponytail of jet black hair, her sharp, precise movements drawing every eye. She was the star of the class, always in the lead, fueled by a confident arrogance. But today, Jenna seemed distracted, her timing off, her eyes distant. Clara noticed but said nothing, merely guiding her mop over a small puddle a student had just spilled. "Careful, floor's wet. You'll slip," Clara spoke up, her voice low but firm, tinged with the weary tones of age. Jenna halted mid-move and turned, her sharp eyes locking on Clara. "Why do you care? Isn't it your job to clean the floor?" She smirked, her sarcasm drawing snickers from a few nearby students. "Or are you planning to join the dance too?" Clara didn't respond. She just smiled, faintly not happy, not sad, and continued mopping. That smile, dim as the streetlights outside, hid a story no one in that room knew. The kids soon returned to their drills, their laughter fading under the music. But Jenna's gaze lingered on Clara a second longer, as if something about her felt off. Clara sensed it, but didn't look up. 30 years ago, she had stood beneath the spotlight, every eye fixed on her. Now she only wished to be invisible. When class ended, the studio grew quiet. The students gathered in a corner, untying shoes, drinking water, chatting noisily. Clara wheeled her mop bucket into the hallway, her steps slow, shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of time. She opened the tiny room at the end of the hall, her resting spot between shifts, barely big enough for a folding bed, an old wooden table, and a bookshelf crammed with yellow dance magazines. On the wall hung a faded black and white photo, a young dancer with arms outstretched, caught in a halo of stage light. Clara stood before the photo, her fingers trembling as they touched the dusty frame. She remembered that night, 34 years ago, the bright lights of Broadway, applause crashing like waves. She, Clarissa James, had been the center of it all. They had called her the new soul of modern dance, they had said. The crowd had risen, chanting her name, flashbulbs popping like falling stars. She was 26, full of hope, convinced that art could change the world. But that light had gone out, swift as a dream, when she dared to stand against Richard Lang, the powerful man who destroyed everything. She sat on the folding bed and reached under her pillow for an old pair of ballet shoes. Faded pink, the ribbons frayed, but she kept them like treasure. Her fingers traced the scuffs on the surface, each one a memory, a performance, a piece of her life. She remembered the long nights of rehearsals, the gentle piano in the practice room, and Richard's smile, a smile she once believed was love, until it became a blade. She had exposed him for what he did to the Arts Fund, for his broken promises. But the world didn't stand with her. The tabloids twisted the truth, the company turned its back, and Clarissa James disappeared, leaving only Clara James, the invisible janitor. Clara held the shoes to her chest and closed her eyes. The music from the studio echoed faintly, a lively Latin rhythm Jenna must have picked. Clara smiled. Jenna had talent, a fire burning within her that even she didn't recognize yet. But fire could be extinguished, if not protected. Clara knew that better than anyone. She had once been Jenna, once believed she was unstoppable until the world proved her wrong. A knock on the door cut through her thoughts. Mr. Thomas, the studio manager, stood at the threshold, his gentle eyes watching her. A former dancer himself, tall and lean with silver hair, he still carried the elegance of an artist. "Clara, are you okay? You seem distant tonight." "I'm fine, Mr. Thomas." Clara tucked the shoes away and forced a smile, her lips tight to mask the emotions. "Just tired, that's all." He nodded, but his eyes said he knew more than she'd admitted. "You're doing great. The kids might be a handful, but they need you. This whole studio does." Clara looked down, avoiding his gaze. His words felt like a small blade, unearthing pain she tried to bury. "Thank you, but I'm just the janitor." Mr. Thomas smiled and shook his head. "You're not just the janitor, Clara. I know that." When he left, Clara closed the door and leaned against the wall. His words struck something deep. She didn't want anyone to know. Not yet. Not here. But every day, as she mopped the floors and watched the kids dance, a part of her stirred to life again. Spark Dance Studio was the only place she still felt alive, even if only as a shadow of who she once was. She didn't know that. Down the hall, Jenna was standing silently, watching Clara's door. The girl stood with arms crossed, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Jenna didn't trust adults. They always lied, always hid things. But there was something about Clara that piqued her curiosity. The way she stood, the way she moved, it didn't feel like a regular janitor. Something was different. Jenna frowned and turned back to her friends. She said nothing, just shrugged and stepped into the studio. Meanwhile, Clara picked up her mop bucket and stepped into the hallway. She didn't see that Jenna was still watching, eyes burning with a silent question. Who is she? You're watching soul stories where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Chapter 2. Who She Used to Be. Clara stood alone in the tiny room at the end of the Spark Studio hallway, the weak yellow glow of an old desk lamp casting shadows over the ballet shoes in her hands. It was late, and the Lower East Side had fallen silent. Only the wind whistled through old window panes, and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat remained. At 60, Clara no longer danced, but these shoes scuffed, with frayed ribbons, were her last thread to a brilliance long gone. She caressed them, fingers tracing faded lines, then set them down gently, as though placing a piece of her soul into the dark. She sat on the folding bed, her eyes drifting far away, deep into memory. 34 years ago, in 1991, Clara, then Clarissa James, stood beneath Broadway's blazing lights, radiant like a halo. She was 26, golden-haired, her arms drawing perfect lines through the air. The crowd chanted her name. Critics hailed her as the new soul of modern dance. Dance magazine featured her on the cover, Clarissa James, redefining movement. Back then, she believed she was invincible, that art was where truth always triumphed. But truth, it turned out, had its price. The memories returned like a song, bittersweet and sharp. Clara closed her eyes and was transported back to an autumn night in 1991, in Richard Lang's luxurious Midtown penthouse. Neon lights from Times Square bled through the tall windows, bathing the room in a soft red hue. Richard stood there, tall, magnetic, with a smile that cut and eyes that seemed to see through her soul. He was Broadway's power producer, the one who had discovered her in a small suburban audition and elevated her from obscurity to lead choreographer of Whispers of the City, that season's biggest hit. He promised her a dazzling future, and she, young and full of dreams, fell in love. Those early days with Richard were a whirlwind of passion. She remembered how he pulled her into his arms, forceful yet tender, as though she were the most precious thing in the world. Their first kiss happened in that very penthouse, under the city lights. His lips touched hers, fierce and burning, like a dance with no music. She felt the heat of his body, his breath mingling with hers, and in that moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. "Clarissa," he whispered, his voice deep like a vow, "you are my light." She melted into him, his arms wrapped tightly around her, pulling her into an embrace that made her feel like she belonged. Their nights together were symphonies of feeling. They didn't just love with their bodies, they dreamed together. After long rehearsals, they'd return to the penthouse, open a bottle of red wine, and let Miles Davis play soft jazz in the background. They'd lounge on the leather sofa, city lights flickering beyond the windows, and talk about art. Richard spoke of performances that would change the world, of how they could reshape Broadway together. She rested her head on his chest, listened to his heartbeat, and imagined a future filled with masterpieces. "We'll make history, Clarissa," he said once, his fingers brushing her hair, and she believed it, because she loved him with a devotion that burned too bright. His embraces weren't just comfort, they were validation. Each time he held her, she felt seen, valued. She remembered one night, after a standing ovation, when he hugged her on the empty stage. "You're a genius, Clarissa," he whispered, his lips brushing her forehead. "No one else could have done what you did." And with a heart overflowing, she believed their love was unbreakable. But Richard wasn't the man she thought he was. Beneath the charm and sweet promises lay a master manipulator. Clara discovered the truth on a rainy afternoon when she accidentally came across a financial statement on his desk. The arts fund Richard managed, a lifeline for young dancers and creative projects, was a swamp of corruption. He was embezzling money, favoring those who obeyed him, and bearing talents that didn't. Her heart clenched in her chest. She still loved him so much that his kisses could still make her tremble, but she couldn't bear the thought of stolen dreams. Her inner conflict lasted for weeks. She remembered nights alone in her small Hell's Kitchen apartment, staring out the window, searching for answers. Part of her wanted to believe Richard could change, that their love could pull him back to the right path. One night, lying beside him in the penthouse, city lights splashed across the ceiling like stars. She took his hand and asked softly, "Richard, do you ever think about doing the right thing, even when it's hard?" He had laughed, pulling her into a deep kiss, as if to erase the question. But his eyes, cold and distant, told her everything. She confronted him, not with anger, but with hope. In his midtown office, bathed in the glow of Times Square, she stood before him, voice trembling but firm. "Richard, you can't keep doing this," she said, eyes locked on his. "Those kids, those artists, they deserve a chance. You're stealing their dreams." He laughed, a cold, unfamiliar sound. "Who do you think you are, Clarissa? Some kind of justice warrior? This is Broadway. No one cares about your truth." His words cut deep, but the deeper wound was in his eyes, devoid of love. Clara realized she couldn't save him, or what they had. She had to choose, stay silent and live in a hollow spotlight, or stand up for what was right and lose everything. She chose truth, even if it broke her heart. She sent an anonymous letter to sponsors and the press, exposing Richard's crimes. She hoped the truth would win, that the dance world would stand by her. But Richard was too powerful. He struck back fast and brutal. Tabloids erupted with lies. Clarissa James, bitter dancer, attacks. Visionary producer. Young choreographer uses fame to ruin colleagues. The lies spread like wildfire. Her company, once her family, turned their backs. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want to risk their futures. Clara lost everything: her name, her career, her faith. She left New York, drifting through small towns, taking whatever jobs kept her afloat. Waitress, movie ticket clerk, even a janitor at a gym. But dance remained in her blood. Every night, in dingy motel rooms, she played old music and let her body move, even if no one watched. She couldn't let go, even if dance had let go of her. 10 years ago, she returned to New York, not as Clarissa James, but as Clara James, an anonymous woman cleaning floors at Spark Studio. She took the job not just because it kept her close to dance, but because of something deeper. Spark was a nonprofit serving immigrant teens, a place where she felt she could still do something meaningful quietly, from the shadows. She funded a small scholarship from her meager savings, meant for kids like Jenna, talented, but without opportunity. No one knew, not even Mr. Thomas, the studio manager. Clara kept it secret, just like the ballet shoes beneath her pillow. She opened her eyes back in the little room. The music from the studio had stopped, but in her mind, A waltz still played the last piece she ever choreographed. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out an old notebook. Inside were sketches of routines, handwritten notes from the days when she was still Clarissa. She flipped through, her fingers gliding over faded ink. A dance left unfinished, a dream abandoned. She remembered one night backstage on Broadway, watching her dancers perform her choreography. She had cried not out of pride, but because she felt she had found her purpose. But that feeling now was a distant luxury. She closed the notebook, put it back, and whispered to herself, "That's enough, Clara. The past is the past." But the past never really leaves. The next morning, Clara rose early and began her routine mopping floors, cleaning locker rooms, checking audio equipment before class. Spark was unlike Manhattan's glossy studios. The walls were chipped, the floorboards creaked, but the space buzzed with life. The students, mostly children of immigrant families, brought with them stories, dreams, pain, and resilience. Jenna arrived earlier than usual, dressed in a black crop top and leggings, hair tied high as always. Clara, cleaning the mirror in the corner, glanced her way. Jenna said nothing, just turned on the music and began practicing alone. Her movements were sharp, but something about them felt strained, like she was fighting herself. Clara recognized it. She'd seen that look in her own reflection years ago. "Your left leg's a bit tight," Clara said gently. "Relax your hips. Let the body lead." Jenna stopped and turned, eyes sharp with suspicion. "What do you know about dance?" She snapped, though a flicker of curiosity softened her tone. Clara smiled and said nothing. She returned to cleaning the mirror. But in that moment, something flickered in her chest, a tiny spark. Jenna, proud and guarded, carried a fire Clara understood. The girl reminded her of herself before the world had broken her. Jenna frowned and resumed practicing, though her eyes occasionally drifted to Clara. There was something about the older woman that gnawed at her. It wasn't the way she cleaned, but the way she stood, back straight, shoulders open, like a real dancer. Jenna shook her head, telling herself she was imagining things, but the question lingered. Who is she? Meanwhile, Clara continued her work, though her mind wandered. She remembered Richard's kisses, his fiery embraces, and the nights she dreamed beside him of a future that never came. She had loved him so deeply his kisses still haunted her. But she loved art more. She loved what was right. And when forced to choose, she chose truth even if it cost her the light that once defined her. From a distance, she watched Jenna stumble and fall. The girl got up quickly, but Clara saw pain flickering in her eyes, not from the fall, but from something deeper. She knew that look. She had worn it too when the world turned its back on her. Clara walked over, picked up Jenna's water bottle, and set it beside her. "Take a break," she said softly. "Don't push yourself too hard." Jenna looked up, words on the tip of her tongue, but instead, she just nodded. Clara turned away, unaware of Jenna's eyes following her, filled with suspicion and wonder. In that quiet moment, an invisible thread began to form between the two women, one who had lost everything for love and truth, and one who was still searching for who she might become. Chapter 3. The Fall. Early morning light filtered through the cracks of the Spark studio windows, casting soft beams across the worn wooden floor, where Clara was meticulously wiping away sweat marks from last night's rehearsal. The studio was quiet, only the steady swish of her mop blended with the cheerful chirps of sparrows outside on the Lower East Side. At 60, Clara moved with a slowness that was deliberate, precise like a dancer who had drilled the same motion 1,000 times. Her silver hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, and her deep blue eyes scanned the room, checking each corner to ensure everything was ready for the morning class. She paused a moment, gazing into the large mirror on the wall, where her reflection stared back like a ghost from another life. Spark wasn't the grand stage of Broadway she once knew, but it had a soul of its own. The peeling walls, faded posters of old performances, and the laughter of young dancers made the space feel both unfamiliar and deeply familiar. She'd been here 10 years now, doing the work no one noticed, cleaning floors, tidying up, and quietly watching over the dreams of young people. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Morning class started at 8. The students trickled in, bringing with them the electric buzz of youth. As usual, Jenna Martinez was at the center of attention. The 17-year-old walked in with her high ponytail, fitted crop top, and black leggings, her sharp eyes hiding a hint of unease. From her corner, Clara noticed the tension in Jenna's framed shoulders, stiff, steps hurried. Jenna was preparing for the trial performance, part of an upcoming fundraiser for the studio. It was her chance to shine, but also a heavy weight to bear. "Jenna, watch the floor," Clara said gently, spotting a small puddle near where Jenna was warming up. "Spilled water easy to slip." Jenna turned, her brow furrowed, eyes flashing with annoyance. "I got it, Mrs. Clara," she snapped. "Just worry about your own job." A few students giggled, but Clara simply nodded and said nothing. She was used to Jenna's pride, but she also saw what the girl tried to hide, the cracks beneath the surface, the quiet desperation. Class began under the guidance of Miss Mia, the studio's lead instructor, a woman in her 30s, with boundless energy and a no-nonsense teaching style. Mia clapped her hands to signal the start of the group routine. Hip-hop music filled the room as students moved in unison. Jenna stood out, as always. Her movements were sharp, nearly flawless, brimming with passion. But from the corner, Clara noticed something more. Jenna was pushing too hard, as if trying to prove something. "Jenna, ease up a little," Mia called out, her voice cutting through the music. "It's about feeling, not just speed." Jenna didn't listen. She spun into a complicated move, and then, in an instant, her foot hit the very puddle Clara had warned her about. A sharp gasp echoed as she slipped and fell, grabbing her ankle, her face contorted in pain. The room froze. Music continued playing, but no one moved. Mia rushed over and knelt beside Jenna. "Jenna, are you okay?" she asked, voice urgent. Jenna bit her lip and tried to stand, but her ankle buckled under her weight. I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky and unconvincing. Clara stood still in the corner, her hand clutching the mop handle tightly. She wanted to go to Jenna, to help her, but she knew she had no right. She was just the janitor. A student ran to get ice while Mia helped Jenna into a chair. "We need to get you to a doctor," Mia said firmly. "Tonight's performance is important, but your health comes first." Jenna shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. "I have to dance," she whispered, almost pleading. "If I don't perform, they won't consider me for the scholarship." Clara turned away, her chest heavy. She knew about that scholarship because she had quietly funded it herself, though no one else knew. She wanted to speak, but instead, she stayed silent and returned to her work, though her eyes never left Jenna. The rehearsal was cut short, and the studio grew tense. By noon, the day got worse. Mia, rushing to get Jenna to the doctor, twisted her own ankle on the stairs outside. She'd be out for at least a week. Spark Studio plunged into chaos. The trial performance that evening was part of a major fundraising event, and without a teacher, the whole plan was at risk. Mr. Thomas, the studio manager, called an emergency meeting. Students sat scattered across the dance floor, their faces full of worry. Clara stood by the doorway, quietly observing, as always. Mr. Thomas, elegant and silver-haired, the embodiment of a former dancer, let out a slow breath. "We need someone to lead tonight's performance," he said. "If we cancel, we risk losing our funding." Murmurs spread among the students, but no one had an answer. A few suggested postponing, but Mr. Thomas shook his head. "The sponsors have confirmed. We need someone now." Clara's heart pounded. She knew she could help. She had led dance companies far larger than this, choreographed performances that brought Broadway to its feet. But she also knew she was no longer Clarissa James. She was Clara the janitor, invisible. She turned to leave, then she heard Mr. Thomas speak. "Clara," he said, his voice steady and clear. "You can do it, can't you?" The room turned to her. Jenna, seated in the corner with her ankle wrapped in ice, furrowed her brows in disbelief. "Her?" she scoffed. "She's just the janitor." Mr. Thomas smiled, a knowing smile. "She's not just the janitor, Jenna. She's Clarissa James." Her name, buried for 34 years, rang out like thunder. The students whispered, some pulling out their phones to look her up. Clara felt her face flush. She wanted to run, to vanish, but Mr. Thomas's gaze held her in place. He stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I've known who you were for a long time," he said quietly, just for her. "You can't keep hiding, Clara. These kids need you." Clara shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I can't, Thomas. I'm not that person anymore." "But you are her," he said with certainty, "and I believe in you." Jenna stood with the help of her crutch, her eyes burning with anger and curiosity. "Who are you, really?" she asked, voice sharp. "If you're so great, why are you here mopping floors?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at Jenna at the pain in her eyes and saw herself. A younger version, fierce and fragile. "I used to dance," Clara finally said, her voice low, "and I lost everything. But I'm here because I still love it." The air in the room shifted. A few students looked at her differently now, as if truly seeing her for the first time. Mr. Thomas clapped his hands, breaking the silence. "Clara will lead tonight's class," he announced. "If anyone disagrees, you're free to leave." No one left. Jenna, though still skeptical, sat down again, her eyes fixed on Clara. Clara took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the studio. She stood tall, shoulders open like a dancer ready to take the stage. She was no longer just the janitor. In that moment, she was Clarissa James, and she knew. She couldn't hide anymore. She clapped her hands, her voice ringing out strong, commanding. "All right, everyone, let's get ready. We have a performance to save." Chapter 4. Silent Dances. The next morning, sunlight streamed into Spark's studio, flooding the worn-out floorboards with golden light, but the atmosphere in the rehearsal room was taut like a drawn bowstring. Clara stood at the center of the studio, arms crossed over her chest, her deep blue eyes sweeping across the loosely formed rows of students. At 60, she no longer had the graceful figure of a Broadway dancer, but when she stood upright, shoulders square, there was something about her presence, a quiet authority, as though she'd once commanded far grander stages than this. The students, still reeling from Mr. Thomas's announcement that the janitor they'd mocked was, in fact, Clarissa James, looked at her with a mix of doubt and curiosity. Jenna Martinez sat in the corner, her right leg wrapped in ice, leaning on a crutch. Her sharp gaze burned with frustration. Unable to dance at least for a few days, she was like a caged animal. Clara felt the tension radiating from her, but she didn't dwell on it. She knew that to earn the respect of these kids, she couldn't rely on a name from the past, she had to prove it. "All right," Clara said, her voice low but cutting clearly through the murmurs. "We have 3 days to prepare for the fundraiser performance. If you think this is just some fun dance show, you're wrong. This is a chance for the studio to survive, for you to keep a place to dance, to dream. I'm not here to play games. If you're not serious, you can leave now." No one moved. Even Jenna, arms crossed and eyebrows drawn, kept her eyes locked on Clara. She didn't speak, but there was a flicker of something in her stare, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Clara clapped her hands, signaling the students to rise. "Let's begin. Your group routine is clean, but it has no soul. You've got the technique, but you're missing the story. Dancing isn't just movement, it's storytelling. Today, I'll show you how to tell that story." She cued a piece of music, not the high-energy hip-hop they were used to, but a slow, haunting piano composition. Deep notes echoed through the room like a whisper from the heart. The students exchanged confused glances. "This isn't really our kind of music," a boy named Miguel spoke up hesitantly. Clara smiled, a look both gentle and challenging. "Then get used to it. Dance isn't just steps. It's emotion. It's truth. It's you. Let's begin." She stepped onto the floor and demonstrated a sequence. Though her age had taken its toll, every gesture she made was purposeful, filled with meaning. Her turns were controlled, her arms tracing soft curves like brushstrokes across the air, telling a story of loss, of hope. The students watched, transfixed. From the corner, Jenna tightened her grip on her crutch, her eyes glued to Clara. Something about the older woman's movement made her feel seen. Clara turned to the class. "Now it's your turn. Don't think about steps. Think about what makes your heart race, joy, pain, whatever it is. Put that into your movement." The rehearsal began awkwardly. The students, used to precision and energy, struggled to connect with their feelings. But Clara didn't give up. She moved among them, correcting posture, guiding with a voice firm yet kind. Miguel, loosen your shoulders. You're telling a story of freedom, not confinement. Lila, don't look at the floor. Look at me like you're speaking to the world. With Jenna, Clara said little. She simply paused beside her, resting a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. You don't need to dance to learn, she said softly. Just watch. Just feel. Jenna didn't respond, but something in her eyes softened. Over the next 3 days, Clara transformed Spark Studio into a crucible. She pushed the students not just in form, but in heart. She told them about the principles of modern dance, how every movement had to be honest, intentional. Dance is integrity, she told them one afternoon as they sat on the floor, exhausted. If you're not honest with yourself, your audience will know. They always know. Jenna, though unable to dance, started showing up more consistently. She sat in the corner with a small notebook, jotting down Clara's words. She never admitted it aloud, but her eyes had changed. The arrogance had faded, replaced by curiosity. One evening after everyone had left, Jenna stayed behind. She flipped through her notebook, then suddenly asked, "How do you know so much? I mean, are you really Clarissa James?" Clara, sweeping the floor, paused. She looked at Jenna and saw in her eyes not defiance but yearning. "I used to be," Clara replied quietly, "but that's a long story." "Then tell it," Jenna said, almost daring her. "If you were famous, why are you here? Cleaning floors?" Clara gave a faint, sad smile. "Sometimes life doesn't give us the choices we want." She didn't elaborate, but the silent scars in her eyes made Jenna fall silent. That night, Jenna didn't go home right away. She lingered in the studio, sneaking into Clara's small room after she had left. On a shelf in the corner, she found an old photograph, faded, but clear. A young woman with golden hair standing beneath Broadway lights, her arms stretched wide under the glow of stage brilliance. Next to it was a clipped article from Dance Magazine, titled Clarissa James, The New Soul of Modern Dance. Jenna skimmed the article, her heart pounding. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange connection to this woman, not as a teacher, but as someone the world had once turned its back on. On the third day, Clara pushed the class harder than ever. She gave them a final challenge: choreograph a solo based on their personal story. "You don't have to spell it out," she told them, standing in the center, her gaze fierce. "But leave a part of yourself on the floor. That's how you reach people." To everyone's surprise, Jenna asked to try. Still on crutches, she shouldn't have been moving. Clara hesitated, concerned for her injury, but Jenna's determined eyes made her nod. "Okay," Clara said, "but go slow and tell your story." Jenna rose, leaning on her crutch, and began to move. She couldn't leap or spin, but she didn't need to. Every step, every gesture spoke of abandonment, of hurt, of the desperate longing to be seen. Clara watched her in silence, and for a moment she saw herself 34 years ago, a young woman with fire in her soul, ready to take on the world. After rehearsal, Jenna stayed behind this time, without her usual group. She sat beside Clara, hesitant. "Did you ever feel like you didn't belong anywhere?" she asked quietly. Clara looked at her and saw the pain in her eyes, the pain of a foster child always having to prove her worth. "Yes," Clara said gently, "and sometimes I still do. But you know what, Jenna? Dance saved me. It gave me a place to belong, if only for a moment." Jenna nodded, her eyes misty. "I'm not good at talking about myself," she admitted, "but when I dance, I feel real." Clara smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then keep dancing, Jenna, and don't let anyone take that away from you." In that moment, something invisible connected them. They were no longer just teacher and student, but two women the world had tried to forget, rediscovering their worth through the silent language of dance. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Chapter 5. The Ghost Returns. Spark Studio glowed in the golden-orange light of sunset. The last rays of daylight streamed through the aging windows, casting long streaks across the wooden floor. Just one day remained before the big fundraising performance, and the air was charged with excitement and tension. Clara stood at the center of the floor, adjusting student formations with eyes that were sharp yet kind, like a conductor guiding a symphony. At 60, she no longer had the lithe frame of a Broadway dancer, but every movement carried the authority of someone who had once stood atop the world. The students, now accustomed to her style, moved with focus and discipline they'd never shown before. In the corner, Jenna Martinez sat with her right leg still wrapped in ice, leaning on her crutch, but the frost in her eyes had begun to melt. After 3 days under Clara's guidance, Jenna had changed. She still wore her pride like armor, but curiosity about Clara, the woman who had once been Clarissa James, had shifted something in her. She clutched her notebook, scribbling down Clara's choreography, her eyes flickering between suspicion and admiration. "All right," Clara clapped, her voice rising above the slow piano track that echoed through the studio. "Today we focus on the group piece. Every person must move like one voice in a chorus. If one of you falters, the whole piece falls apart. Understand?" The students nodded, falling into position. Clara watched closely, correcting the smallest of details. "Miguel, lift your arms higher. Lila, slow down, let the emotion guide you." She moved among them, her tone both firm and encouraging, like a mother guiding her children. When she reached Jenna, she paused. "You can join this part, Jenna. Use your upper body, tell your story with your hands." Jenna frowned but rose, steadying herself with her crutch. She moved her arms with surprising grace, as if painting something invisible in the air. Clara gave a small smile and nodded. "Good. Hold on to that feeling." Rehearsal was progressing smoothly until the studio doors swung open. A man stepped inside, tall and imposing, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his tailored suit perfectly fitted. He stood at the entrance like he owned the room, his gaze sweeping across the space with the confidence of someone used to being noticed. Clara, standing mid-floor, felt her heart stop for just a second. Richard Lang, the man who had once been everything love, dream, and nightmare, now stood in the Spark studio like a ghost summoned from the past. Richard smiled, that same sharp smile she once adored, now enough to chill her blood. "Hello, everyone," he said, his voice smooth and rich, like he belonged there. "I'm Richard Lang, the primary sponsor of your fundraiser. Just dropping by to see how things are going." Mr. Thomas stepped forward from the corner, shaking his hand with polite restraint. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Lang," he said. "We're making great progress thanks to Clara here." Richard turned to Clara, his eyes flashing with recognition. "Clara?" he said softly, layers of meaning behind the word. "How interesting to find you here." He stepped closer, and the air around Clara thickened. The students kept rehearsing, unaware, but Jenna, watching from the corner, sensed the shift. She gripped her crutch tighter, eyes locked on Clara and the stranger. "Mr. Lang," Clara said, her voice even but cold. "Thank you for supporting the studio." She tried to sound steady, but memories crashed into her fiery kisses, passionate embraces, and the moment she realized their love was just a lie. Richard smiled, eyes cold. "I've always supported the arts, Clara. You know that." He tilted his head as if assessing her. "You look different, but I suppose time changes all of us, doesn't it?" Clara didn't answer. She clapped her hands and turned back to the students. "Let's keep going. We don't have time to waste." But Richard didn't leave. He lingered in the corner like a wolf biding his time. When rehearsal ended and the students filed out, Richard stayed behind. Mr. Thomas invited him into the office to discuss final details. But before going, Richard leaned toward Clara, voice low and sharp. "If you're planning a comeback, Clarissa," he whispered, "I'll make sure the world remembers the truth about you. The press still loves a good scandal, you know." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. He knew she was trying to reclaim a part of herself, and he wouldn't let her do it easily. She met his gaze, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Richard." He smirked, cold and cruel. "You should be." And then he disappeared into the office with Mr. Thomas, leaving Clara alone in the empty studio, her heart pounding. From across the room, Jenna had seen and heard everything. She stood, crutch under her arm, and stormed toward Clara, eyes burning. "You lied to us," Jenna said, voice shaking. "You're Clarissa James, but you never told us." You let us think you were just a janitor. Why?" Clara looked at her, seeing not just anger but betrayal in the girl's eyes. She knew that feeling well. She'd lived it when the world turned its back on her. "I didn't lie, Jenna," she said softly. "I just didn't want my past to define me." "But you let him talk to you like that," Jenna nearly shouted, pointing toward the office. "He threatened you, and you just stood there. If you were once somebody powerful, why do you let him treat you like you're nothing?" Clara's lips pressed together, her gaze dimming. She wanted to tell Jenna everything, how Richard had destroyed her, how the world believed his lies, but all she said was, "Sometimes standing up doesn't mean yelling. Sometimes it means continuing on no matter who tries to stop you." Jenna shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't get it," she said, voice breaking. "I thought you were different. I thought you'd teach me how to be strong, but you just gave up." Her words were a blade. Clara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to hold the girl, to explain that staying, teaching, even cleaning was her way of fighting. But she said nothing. She only watched as Jenna turned and limped out of the studio, leaving Clara alone on the floor. Darkness crept in like a curtain descending. Richard still held power enough to destroy her again. She thought of walking away, of disappearing once more into anonymity. She'd done it before. She could do it again. But then she heard Jenna's voice echo in her mind. "If you won't dance for yourself, then dance for us." That sentence, born of anger, struck something deep inside her. Clara looked down at her hands that had once drawn movements that lit up Broadway. She was no longer Clarissa James of 34 years ago, but she was still Clara, the woman who had survived it all. She walked into her small room and pulled out her old ballet shoes. She ran her fingers over the worn fabric, feeling every scar of time. "I'm not giving up," she whispered. "Not this time." She returned to the studio, turned on the music, and began to move. No one watched. There was only her and the creaking floor. She danced not for glory, not for a crowd, but to remind herself that she was still here, that her story wasn't over. And as the last light of day faded from the windows, Clara knew. No matter what Richard tried, he would never steal her light again. Chapter 6. The Final Dance. The night of the fundraiser arrived at Spark Studio like an autumn breeze, crisp, electric, and tinged with tension. The old building on the Lower East Side had been decorated simply but warmly, with strings of golden lights draped over the windows and a large poster at the entrance reading, "Spark, where dreams dance." Inside, the main rehearsal room had been transformed into a makeshift stage, folding chairs arranged neatly for an audience of donors, students' families, and a few local journalists. The stage lights lit the scuffed wooden floor, highlighting the silent stories etched into its grain. Clara stood backstage behind a makeshift curtain of black fabric. At 60, she wore a simple black blouse and slacks, her silver hair tied back neatly. But her deep blue eyes gleamed as if she were once again preparing to step onto a Broadway stage. She hadn't planned to perform tonight, but her role as director meant everything had to run flawlessly. Students in matching costumes buzzed around her, checking shoes, whispering lines, their eyes lit with a mix of fear and thrill. Jenna Martinez stood off to the side, her right leg still lightly bandaged, but the crutch was gone. She wore a sleek black leotard, her hair tied high, her sharp eyes betraying a hidden anxiety. Clara had allowed her to perform her solo, despite her concerns for Jenna's injury, because in her eyes, she had seen something unmistakable, the fire she herself once carried, 34 years ago. "You can do this," Jenna had said, and Clara had believed her. From behind the curtain, Clara watched the crowd file in. Donors took their seats, voices murmuring beneath the soft background music. Mr. Thomas, in a pressed old suit, stood at the entrance, greeting guests. Clara took a deep breath, trying to still the trembling in her chest. Richard Lang sat front and center, composed like a king surveying his court. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his sharp gaze scanning the stage with quiet authority. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. She remembered his threat from the day before. "If you step into the light, I'll remind the world of your truth." She clenched her fists. Not tonight, she told herself. The show began with the group number Clara had coached over the past 3 days. The students stepped onto the stage, bathed in warm light. A slow piano melody played, joined by gentle percussion, creating a moving emotional score. Clara watched from the wings, her chest tight. They weren't perfect, some steps were off, some turns shaky, but they had soul. They had truth. They had something no technique could teach. When the music ended, the room burst into applause. Clara smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. But the moment everyone had waited for was Jenna's solo. She stepped onto the stage, lit by a single spotlight. Her slim frame seemed small under the light, but her presence filled the room. The music began, a violin piece Clara had chosen, its aching notes piercing through the silence like memory. Jenna moved slow, deliberate, powerful. Every gesture told a story of pain, of abandonment, of the desperate need to be seen. Her right leg still ached, but she didn't let it stop her. She twisted, spun gently, her arms painting shapes in the air like wings struggling to lift from ash. Every step was a confession, every motion a cry. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She saw herself in Jenna, not just the talent, but the will to rise in a world that so often refused to see them. But Jenna was different. She wasn't dancing for fame. She danced for the studio, for her friends, and for Clara herself. As the final note faded and Jenna held her last pose, arms wide, bathed in light, the crowd leapt to their feet. Cheers erupted. Clara heard voices chant, "Jenna! Jenna!" Jenna stood breathless, eyes shining. She turned to the wings and smiled, no arrogance, just pure, radiant gratitude. Clara nodded, her heart full. No matter how tonight ended, Jenna had found her own light. Then a voice cut through the air. "Clarissa James!" A man stood from the back row, voice rising over the crowd. Clara froze. She knew him, a veteran journalist from New York Arts Review, one of the first to write about her downfall. He held a camera, eyes gleaming as though he'd found buried treasure. Mr. Thomas quickly stepped forward, trying to intercept. "Thank you all for being here. We'll now move to our next..." But the man pressed forward. "Clarissa James," he repeated. "You're here, aren't you? You're the one who trained these kids, right?" Behind the curtain, Clara's heart pounded. She looked into the crowd and saw Richard Lang smiling, cold, patient, waiting. He had orchestrated this. He wanted her dragged into the spotlight and back into judgment. She thought about fleeing, about returning to her small room and disappearing again. Then Jenna's voice rang out from center stage. "Miss Clarissa." Everyone turned. Jenna stood tall, her voice ringing like a bell. "Clarissa James, come out here." Her eyes blazed with fire. "Come out here, we need you." A hush fell over the room. Jenna limped to the edge of the stage, her voice trembling but strong. "Please, come out. We need you." And suddenly the students began clapping. "Miss Clarissa! Miss Clarissa!" The applause spread. Even those unaware of her story joined in, drawn in by the power of the moment. Clara inhaled deeply. Her chest ached with emotion. She couldn't hide anymore. Not when they were calling her name. She stepped out from behind the curtain, and the light hit her like the sun rising over a dark sea. The room erupted. Clara stood tall, shoulders back, eyes wide open. She looked at the journalist, at Richard, and at every person who had ever doubted her. "I'm Clarissa James," she said, voice clear and unwavering. "I once lost my voice, but tonight I'm taking it back." Applause thundered around her like waves. Jenna stepped forward and took Clara's hand. She didn't say anything, but her eyes, wet with tears, spoke volumes. "Thank you." The students surged forward, surrounding Clara, hugging her, whispering words of thanks. Clara let the tears fall freely, a release she had held in for decades. Richard stood slowly, clapped once, twice, but his eyes were icy. He turned and walked out, fading into the shadows like a ghost finally exorcised. Clara knew he could still try to hurt her, but for the first time in 34 years, she was no longer afraid. She had reclaimed herself, not through glory, but through truth. When the performance ended, the audience flooded the stage, embracing the students, showering them with praise. Clara stood back, letting them have their moment. Jenna held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Clara smiled, looking into her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for calling my name." That night, as the studio lights dimmed, Clara returned to her small room. She took out her old ballet shoes, placed them gently on the table, and looked at the black and white photo on the wall of a younger Clarissa James under the Broadway lights. She wasn't that woman anymore, but she was no longer just a janitor either. She was Clara James, the woman who had found her voice again, through dance, through dreams, and through a girl who reminded her that the light never truly goes out. Chapter 7. Lights Reunited. The fundraising performance at Spark Studio had ended, but the atmosphere still shimmered as if the lights had yet to dim. The crowd gradually dispersed, leaving behind echoes of laughter, hugs, and congratulations that reverberated through the aging halls of the Lower East Side building. Clara stood in the corner of the rehearsal room, her deep blue eyes quietly watching the students share their joy with their families. At 60, she felt a rare peace, as if she had just stepped through a door she had kept shut for 34 years. Declaring, "I am Clarissa James," on stage the night before, was not only a confrontation with her past, but also a statement that she had found herself again. Jenna Martinez, still glowing from her successful solo, stood near Clara, her eyes sparkling. Her right leg was still lightly bandaged, but the smile on her face was brighter than ever. "Miss Clara," Jenna said, her voice soft but sincere, "last night, I didn't think you'd come out, but I'm glad you did." Clara smiled, placing a hand on Jenna's shoulder. "You were the one who called me out, Jenna. If it weren't for you, I'd still be hiding backstage." Jenna blushed and turned away, but pride danced on her lips. As the room cleared, Clara began to tidy up an old habit, even though she was no longer just the janitor. She picked up stray water bottles, stacked chairs, and wiped the wooden floor, as if this work grounded her in reality. But as she bent down to pick up a dropped program sheet, a familiar voice rang out behind her. "Miss Clarissa James!" Clara turned, her heart racing. It was the journalist from New York Arts Review, the one who had spoken her name aloud the night before, sparking the moment she stepped into the spotlight. He was a man of about 65, with graying hair and thin-frame glasses, standing at the doorway with a small notebook in hand. His eyes no longer gleamed with the thrill of a scoop, but held the weight of remorse. "I'm Martin Keller," he introduced in a low voice. "I wrote about you 34 years ago, and I owe you an apology." Clara straightened, eyes cautious. She remembered Martin, the writer of the first article that twisted her story, calling her jealous when she exposed Richard Lang. That article marked the beginning of her downfall. Now he stood here, inside Spark Studio, visibly remorseful. "You don't owe me anything," Clara said, her voice cold, but not harsh. "That was a long time ago." Martin shook his head, stepping closer. "No, Miss Clara, I was wrong. I was young, ambitious, and I believed what Richard Lang said without question. I helped hurt you, and I haven't forgiven myself for that." Clara looked at him, her expression softening. She saw sincerity in Martin's eyes and realized he, too, bore scars of the past, though in a different way. "Back then, no one wanted to hear the truth," she said quietly. "I don't blame you." Martin nodded, his gaze resolute. "I want to make it right. I want to write a new article about you, what you've done for this studio, for these kids. And I want to tell the truth about what happened 34 years ago. You deserve to be vindicated." Clara felt her heart tighten. Vindicated. The word echoed in her mind like an old melody, both sweet and painful. She had lived 34 years in the shadows, believing the truth might never come to light. But now, standing in Spark Studio, with Jenna's and the students' eyes fresh in her memory, she felt a flicker of hope. "All right," she said, softly but firmly. "But not for me. For these kids. For the studio." Martin smiled and jotted something down. "You're still the same, Miss Clara, always thinking of others first." He promised to return the next day to interview her and the students, then left, leaving Clara standing still in the rehearsal room, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, in another part of New York, Richard Lang sat in his lavish midtown office, neon lights from Times Square, casting shadows across the window, a mocking reminder of his Broadway reign. But today, the mood was grim. A financial report lay open on his desk, and his phone buzzed endlessly with messages from donors and partners. Clarissa James's reappearance at Spark Studio had stirred waves not just in the arts world, but across the media. Old questions were resurfacing about the Arts Foundation and the accusations Clara had made 34 years ago. Richard knew Martin Keller's article could be a fatal blow. He had survived past scandals with power and connections, but times had changed. In 2025, with transparency more valued than ever, embezzlement and manipulation no longer stayed hidden. He called his lawyer, voice cold but tinged with worry. "Handle this. I don't want my name dragged into the light." But the lawyer had no good news. "Richard, someone contacted the New York Department of Justice. They're reviewing old transactions from the foundation back in the 1990s. If Miss James agrees to testify, and if Keller's article sparks an investigation, you could be facing charges of embezzlement and financial fraud." Richard slammed a hand on the desk, eyes blazing. But deep down, he knew this time there would be no escape. Under New York Penal Law Section 155, grand larceny involving large sums could carry a sentence of up to 7 years. More than that, his reputation, the empire he had built over decades, was crumbling. Days later, Martin Keller's article was published in New York Arts Review, titled Clarissa James, The Return of a Legend and the Truth Forgotten. The article recounted Clara's journey from her golden days on Broadway to the scandal twisted by Richard Lang. Martin didn't rely solely on Clara's story. He found old documents, reached out to witnesses from that time, and exposed how Richard manipulated the media to destroy her. The article praised Clara's work at Spark Studio, describing her as a woman who rediscovered her light by inspiring a new generation. The article went viral in New York's art scene. Social media buzzed with posts about Clara, and the hashtag number Justice for Clarissa James trended on X. Spark Studio's donors pledged increased support, and young dancers from all over reached out, eager to learn from her. But what touched Clara most was a letter from a group of former Broadway company members, those who once turned their backs on her. They wrote, "We're sorry we didn't stand with you. You were our light, and we're proud to see you shine again." Meanwhile, the New York Department of Justice officially launched an investigation into Richard Lang. With the documents Martin Keller provided and Clara's testimony, they uncovered evidence of Arts Foundation embezzlement from the 1990s. Richard was summoned for questioning. Even with top-tier legal defense, the pressure and overwhelming evidence forced him into a plea deal. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for grand larceny, along with financial restitution to the affected arts organizations. His reputation shattered, Richard Lang faded from Broadway's memory. Back at Spark Studio, Clara became a center of attention, but she remained humble. She continued teaching dance classes, not as Broadway's Clarissa James, but as Clara James, the woman who had found her voice again. Jenna, now nearly fully recovered, became her unofficial assistant. Their relationship deepened not just as teacher and student, but as two women healing together from the scars of the past. One afternoon after class, Jenna pulled Clara onto the empty stage. "Miss Clara," she said, eyes glowing, "you have to dance, just once. For me." Clara laughed and shook her head. "I'm too old, Jenna. The stage is yours now." But Jenna wouldn't relent. She played a slow waltz, the one Clara had choreographed 34 years ago. "You taught me how to tell my story," Jenna said. "Now it's your turn." Clara hesitated, but the trust in Jenna's eyes was too strong to deny. She stepped onto the stage, studio lights shining down, just like the old days. She danced slowly, but full of emotion. Every movement told a piece of her life: joy, pain, loss, and rebirth. Jenna stood in silence, tears streaming not from sadness, but from witnessing the strength of a woman who had overcome her past. When Clara finished, Jenna clapped and shouted, "Miss Clarissa!" That was incredible. And this time, Clara didn't correct her. She simply smiled, feeling the light within her, the light she thought lost forever, burning brighter than ever. The story ends, but Clara James's journey leaves profound lessons. Her integrity, though it cost her career, proved that truth is always worth it. She found light again through teaching dance, showing that second chances are forged from the ashes. Dance became the space where she and Jenna healed, telling their stories through every step. Vindication after 34 years showed that justice, though slow, can prevail. And the friendship between Clara and Jenna, two wounded souls, helped them reclaim their worth and affirm the quiet power of human connection.